My name is Clara Sterling, and for 42 years, my world was a duet. Now, at 73, I am learning to sing alone. Arthur, my husband, was the quiet harmony to my melody, the steady rhythm beneath the fluctuations of our life together. He was a builder, not just of houses, but of security, of futures. He built the home in Crestwood where we raised our son, Leo, and he built a life for us that felt as solid and dependable as the foundations he poured. I thought I knew every blueprint, every support beam of the world he had created. It took his sudden passing, a heart that simply decided it had beaten enough, for me to realize I had only ever seen the finished structure, never the intricate plans that held it all together. This story is not about the bitterness of betrayal, though that is certainly part of it. It is about the quiet discovery of my own strength, a foundation I never knew I had. It's about learning that love, true love, sometimes prepares you for the battles you don't even see coming. It is a story I feel compelled to share, a map of sorts for anyone who has ever felt like a guest in their own life. The dining room in our Crestwood home felt cavernous without Arthur. The oak table, a piece he'd restored himself, its surface gleaming with the patina of 1,000 family meals, now seemed to stretch for miles. It had been 10 days since we laid him to rest beneath the old maple tree in the town cemetery, 10 days since the world had lost its color and sound, leaving only a muted, gray hum. The grief was a physical weight, a heavy cloak I couldn't shrug off, making each breath a conscious effort. "Could you pass the green beans, Clara?" Fiona's voice, sharp and precise, sliced through the quiet. My daughter-in-law had a way of speaking that left no room for warmth. Tonight, however, her usual coolness was edged with something sharper, a brittle impatience. I reached for the porcelain bowl, my hand still possessing a slight tremor that had been my constant companion since Arthur's collapse. At 73, I had believed myself prepared for widowhood, but the reality was a hollow ache that echoed with every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock Arthur wound every Sunday without fail. Leo, our son, sat between us. At 45, he still had the boyish hair that flopped over his forehead, but his eyes, the same deep blue as his father's, were shadowed and evasive. He had barely looked at me all evening, his focus fixed on his plate, or on Fiona, his wife of 17 years. The boy who once ran to me with scraped knees and tangled nightmares now couldn't seem to meet my gaze. "The service was lovely, wasn't it?" I offered, the silence pressing in on me. "Your father would have been so touched to see how many people came to say goodbye." Fiona set her fork down with a delicate, yet deliberate, clink. "Yes, well, that's actually something we need to talk to you about, Clara." A familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I looked from her perfectly made-up face to my son's averted one, searching for the shared sorrow that should have bound us together. Instead, I saw a chilling resolve in Fiona's eyes and a deep, uncomfortable compliance in Leo's. "What is it you need to talk about?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Fiona straightened, adopting the posture she used when about to issue a directive. I'd seen it many times, usually when she was explaining why Leo couldn't make our weekly Sunday dinner, or why a long-held family tradition was now inconvenient. "Leo and I have been discussing things," she began, her tone layered with a false sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. "Now that Arthur's gone, well, this house is simply too much for you to manage on your own." I blinked, the words not quite registering. "Too much?" "Fiona, I've helped run this house for over 40 years. I know every groaning pipe and drafty window." "That's precisely the point," she said, her patience already wearing thin. "You're not getting any younger, Clara. The maintenance, the property taxes, the sheer size of it all, it's a burden." The word burden landed like a stone in my chest. This was my home. Arthur and I had scrimped and saved for the down payment. We'd painted every room, planted every rosebush in the garden. Leo's height chart was still faintly visible on the pantry door frame. Leo finally spoke, his voice a low mumble. "Mom, Fiona has a point. The upkeep alone is going to be a lot for you to handle." "I'm not an invalid, Leo," I said, a crack appearing in my composure. "And this house, your father and I built our entire life within these walls. Every corner holds a memory." Fiona's expression hardened into one of pragmatic condescension. "Memories don't pay the heating bill, Clara." You have to be realistic. I stared at her, this woman who had so methodically, so politely, carved me out of my son's life. The woman who had convinced Leo that holidays needed to be fairly divided, which always resulted in a quick Christmas morning visit before they spent the rest of the week with her family. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, the answer already forming like a shard of ice in my heart. We think you should start looking at some of the lovely retirement communities, Fiona said, as if bestowing a great gift. Places with planned activities, social events with people your own age. It would be so much better for you than rattling around in this big, empty house. I turned to my son, a desperate plea in my eyes. Leo, you want me to sell the house where you took your first steps? The home your father. It makes sense, Mom, he interrupted, his gaze finally meeting mine for a fleeting, guilt-ridden second before skittering away. And frankly, Fiona and I could use the space. We've been wanting to start a family, and this house has so much room. The true meaning of their words washed over me, a wave of icy water that stole my breath. They didn't just want me to leave. They wanted my home. The home Arthur and I had poured our love and labor into for 4 decades. Fiona's voice dropped, shedding all pretense of concern. Now that Arthur is dead, Clara, it's time to be practical. Grieve, pack your bags, and move on. The house was never really yours anyway. Her words were delivered with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. Leo looked up then. For a heart-stopping moment, I saw a flicker of his father in his eyes, a flash of doubt, of shame. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared. He offered a small, tight smile and nodded. She's right, Mom. The house was in Dad's name. He took care of everything. You were living here with him. My world tilted. Just living here. As if 42 years of marriage, of partnership, of raising a child and building a life together amounted to nothing more than a long-term tenancy. As if I were merely a piece of furniture he had acquired along the way. I see, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady, a calm surface on a churning sea of shock and pain. Inside, something fundamental was fracturing. Not just my heart, but my entire understanding of my son, of the family I thought we were. I pushed my chair back and stood, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I'll need some time too. 3 weeks, Fiona cut in, her voice sharp as a guillotine. That's more than enough time to find a suitable place and arrange for packers. 3 weeks. Not 3 months. Not even a grace period to navigate the fog of grief. 3 weeks to dismantle a life. Leo looked at me directly then, and what I saw in his face was worse than anger or greed. It was a placid indifference to my suffering. It's for the best, Mom, he said, the words a hollow echo. You'll be much happier. I didn't argue. I simply turned and walked up the stairs to the bedroom I had shared with Arthur. The scent of his cedarwood aftershave still lingered in the air. His worn leather-bound copy of Walden was on the nightstand, a bookmark halfway through. I sat on the edge of our bed and looked at my reflection in the antique dresser mirror. The woman who stared back seemed frail, her silver hair an untidy halo, her eyes wide with a pain that was deeper than grief. In 3 weeks, I was expected to vacate this room, this house, this life. I was to pack up 42 years of love and memories into cardboard boxes and hand the keys over to a son who had just informed me I was never truly home. But as I sat there, the evening light fading, a tiny, unfamiliar ember began to glow deep within me, beneath the layers of shock and sorrow. It was a spark of defiance. Arthur had always been the one to manage our finances, the protector of our worldly goods. But he was also a meticulous man who had taught me one thing above all else: read the fine print. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just pack. I would make an appointment. I would go to the bank and I would read every line. Because if Leo and Fiona believed they could simply erase me, they had forgotten one crucial detail. I was Arthur Sterling's wife. And Arthur never left a job unfinished. The morning sun, usually a welcome guest in my kitchen, felt intrusive as it streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. 2 weeks had passed since that devastating dinner. 2 weeks of living in a house that no longer felt like my own. It felt like a museum of my former life, with Leo and Fiona as the new, impatient curators. They had already had a realtor through, a slick young woman who spoke of good bones and curb appeal, while I hovered in the background like a ghost. Fiona had even started a Pinterest board for the renovation, which she'd accidentally shared with me. I'd spent those 14 days in a daze, sorting through Arthur's clothes, his books, the ephemera of a life well lived, trying to decide what could be contained in boxes and what would have to be left behind. But this morning, the numbness was receding, replaced by a quiet, clear-headed resolve. It was time to face the numbers. The drive to Crestwood Community Bank was a journey through my own history. I'd made this trip with Arthur hundreds of times. He would go inside to conduct our business, while I'd wait in the car with a book, content to let him handle what he called the dreary paperwork. He'd always said he was sparing me the boredom. Now, I suspected he was sparing me something else entirely. Mrs. Gable, the branch manager, a kind woman with a soft smile and an impeccable memory for her clients' lives, greeted me with gentle sympathy. "Clara, I was so terribly sorry to hear about Arthur. He was a true gentleman. Always had a kind word." "Thank you, Carol. He always said you were the sharpest banker in town." I settled into the plush chair opposite her desk, my leather handbag clutched in my lap like a shield. "I'm here because I need to get a clear picture of my financial situation. Arthur managed everything, and I'm afraid I'm rather at sea." Carol's expression was one of complete understanding. "Of course. It can be overwhelming. Let me just pull up your accounts." She turned to her computer, her fingers tapping a familiar rhythm. A moment later, she paused, her brow furrowing slightly. "Oh my." My heart gave a painful lurch. Had Leo and Fiona somehow already made a move? Is something wrong? No, not wrong at all. It's just, there's more here than I expected, Clara. Let's start with the basics. She printed a statement and slid it across the polished desk. "This is the joint checking account you and Arthur used for day-to-day expenses. The balance was healthy, enough to cover my bills for the foreseeable future." A wave of relief washed over me. At least I wouldn't be penniless. "And here," she continued, printing another sheet, "is the joint savings account." This balance was far more substantial, a testament to Arthur's lifelong habit of thrift. It was a comfortable nest egg, enough to live on for years. "That's wonderful," I said, the tension in my shoulders easing. "Arthur was always so careful." He was indeed, Carol agreed, but her eyes were still fixed on the screen, a look of perplexity on her face. "Clara, there are several other accounts listed here that I need to verify with you. It appears they're in your name only. When was the last time you and Arthur reviewed your complete financial portfolio together?" "In my name only?" I echoed, confused. "That can't be right. We shared everything." Carol's fingers flew across the keyboard again. "According to our records, there are 4 additional accounts in your name. 2 long-term investment certificates, a high-yield money market account, and, this is interesting, an investment trust established 6 years ago." My head felt light. "I don't understand. Arthur never said a word about any of this. May I ask you a delicate question?" Carol's voice was soft. "Did Arthur ever express any concerns about your family situation? Sometimes, when clients are worried about future pressures or inheritance disputes, they set up separate financial instruments to ensure a spouse's security." The question hung in the air between us. I thought of Arthur's quiet sighs after phone calls with Leo. The way he'd grown distant when Fiona would talk about their friends' lavish vacations or home renovations. The time he'd gently refused Leo's request to be added to our accounts, just to make it easier to help out if something happens. "Can you tell me more about these accounts?" I asked, my voice a whisper. Carol began printing again. The statements she handed me told a story of methodical, secret saving. The investment certificates had been rolling over and accruing interest for years. The money market account showed small, regular automatic transfers from our joint account, $100 here, $200 there, amounts I would never have noticed, but which had accumulated into a small fortune. How is this possible? I breathed, staring at the numbers. "I never signed any paperwork for these." "Actually, you did," Carol said gently, producing a thick file folder. "Your signature is on every application." It seems Arthur would bring you in to sign documents periodically, likely telling you they were for routine updates or insurance renewals. She showed me the forms. There was my familiar, looping signature, dated and witnessed. I recalled some of the occasions: the day we came in to update our address after the city renumbered our street, the time we consolidated our old passbook savings. He had slid a stack of papers in front of me, pointed to the line, and said, "Just sign here, Ellie." And I had, without question, because I trusted him. He never told me what I was really signing, I murmured, a fresh wave of grief and a new, startling sense of awe washing over me. "It's not as uncommon as you might think," Carol said carefully. "And legally, everything is impeccable. These accounts, Clara, are yours and yours alone." I tried to absorb the reality of it. While Leo and Fiona were picking out new paint colors for my living room, while they were treating me as a liability to be managed, I possessed resources they couldn't imagine. "There is one last thing," Carol said, her tone growing even more cautious. "The investment trust one mentioned. It's called the Sterling Artisans Trust. For the past 6 years, it has been receiving significant, regular deposits from a commercial business account." She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "I believe that was Arthur's company, wasn't it?" "Yes, Sterling and Son Artisans. But Arthur retired years ago. Leo told me he sold the business, and the money from the sale just barely covered its debts." Carol consulted her screen one last time. "According to our records, that business account is still very much active. There have been consistent deposits, followed by transfers into your trust. Clara, I think you need to speak with the company accountant. There may be a great deal more to this story." I left the bank in a fog, my handbag heavy with a portfolio of my hidden life. I drove not home, but to a small park overlooking the river, and I sat on a bench, spreading the papers out beside me. The numbers didn't lie. Arthur, my quiet, unassuming husband, had been building a financial fortress around me for years. Every certificate, every transfer, every trust was a stone in a wall designed to protect me. As I studied the trust statements, a pattern emerged. The largest deposits often corresponded with the months following a visit from Leo, usually after he'd spoken to his father about a can't-miss investment opportunity or a temporary cash flow problem. Arthur had been giving our son money, but for every dollar he gave Leo, it seemed he had secretly set aside 2 for me. As if he knew. As if he had seen this day coming all along. My phone buzzed with a text from Fiona. "Realtor wants to do an open house next weekend. Hope you're making progress on finding a new place." Smiley face emoji. I looked from the vapid cheer of her message to the solid, irrefutable proof of my husband's love in my lap. They were so sure of themselves, so certain they held all the power. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was about to give way. Tomorrow, I would call the accountant. I would find out exactly what else Arthur had left in my name. And then, I would decide what to do with the knowledge that my husband had loved me enough to ensure I would never be at anyone's mercy. The grief was still a raw, open wound, but beneath it, a new and unfamiliar feeling was taking root, a quiet, steely strength. The office of Davis and Finch Accounting was in a modest brick building downtown, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. I had never set foot in it. Arthur's meetings with his accountant were, like his trips to the bank, a solo affair. "No need for both of us to be bored by spreadsheets, Ellie," he'd say with a smile. Now I knew he was protecting me from far more than boredom. Sarah Davis was a woman around my own age, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense air that I found instantly reassuring. She had managed the books for Sterling and Son Artisans for nearly 2 decades. When I had called her, her voice had been warm with sympathy for my loss, but held a note of professional reserve. "Clara," she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk, which was an oasis of order in a room piled high with files. "First, my deepest condolences. Arthur was a fine man. An honest man. I'll miss our quarterly reviews." "Thank you, Sarah. I'm beginning to realize there was a side to his business life I never fully appreciated." I settled in, my folder of bank statements held tight. "I'm trying to understand my financial position. The bank mentioned ongoing income from the business, which came as a surprise. My son had told me the company was sold years ago. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Sold? Clara, Sterling and Son Artisans wasn't sold. It was restructured. She turned to her monitor, clicking through files. 6 years ago, Arthur transferred the ownership of all company assets, the equipment, the client contracts, the goodwill, into a trust. The Sterling Artisans Trust. She looked at me pointedly. You are the sole trustee and beneficiary. The room seemed to sway. I own the company. The trust owns the company, and you own the trust, she clarified. And it's been doing very well. After the restructuring, Arthur became very selective. He focused on smaller, high-end restoration projects with reliable clients. It generated a steady, predictable income stream, far more stable than the big commercial jobs he used to take on. She printed a stack of pages and handed them to me. These are the profit and loss statements for the last 6 years. As you can see, the company has generated a very healthy net revenue year after year. I stared at the columns of figures, my hands shaking. The annual profits were substantial, more than explaining the deposits into the trust account Carol had shown me. But Arthur was retired, I said weakly. He wasn't working. He stepped back from the day-to-day, yes. But he managed the bids, handled client relations, and oversaw the finances. The on-site work, the actual building, has been managed by Mark Riley. You know Mark, of course. I nodded. Mark had started with Arthur as a teenager, a lanky apprentice who had grown into a master craftsman and loyal foreman. He had been at the funeral, his face etched with a grief that felt as profound as my own. Mark has been the operational manager for years, Sarah continued. Arthur set it up so Mark receives a generous percentage of the profits as his salary. It's kept him dedicated and loyal. The arrangement has been remarkably successful. Why? The question was a breath. Why didn't Arthur tell me any of this? Sarah hesitated, her professional demeanor softening. Clara, this may be crossing a line, but Arthur was worried. He spoke of Leo's financial troubles, of Fiona's expectations. He was concerned that if the full extent of the company's continued success was known, it would create pressures and demands that could jeopardize your long-term security. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a devastating clarity. Every time Leo had come to his father with a sob story or a new business scheme, every time Fiona had dropped a hint about their mounting bills, Arthur had been performing a delicate balancing act, helping his son while fortifying my future. He was protecting me, I said, the words thick with emotion. He was protecting both of you, in his own way, Sarah said gently. The financial support he gave Leo over the years was significant. But it was always structured as a formal loan from the business, not as a gift from his personal funds. He was very, very meticulous about the paperwork. She retrieved another file. These are copies of the loan agreements between the company and your son. I opened the folder. Page after page of legal documents, each signed by Arthur and Leo. The sums were shocking, nearly $150,000 over 6 years, for everything from a down payment on their car to funding a series of failed online ventures. Has Leo made any payments on these loans? I asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah's expression was pained. The payment history shows a consistent pattern of arrears. As of this month, the total outstanding principal and accumulated interest is $148,600. The number hung in the air, a monument to my son's deceit. He owed the family business, my business, almost $150,000. At the same time he was trying to kick me out of my home, claiming his father had left nothing but debt. What happens to that debt now? I asked. It's an asset of the trust. As the trustee, you have the legal authority to call in the loan, restructure it, or forgive it, as you see fit. I thought of Leo and Fiona, so confident in their inheritance, so dismissive of my place in the family. There's one more thing you should know, Sarah said, her voice dropping. 2 days after Arthur's funeral, Leo contacted me. He said that with his father's passing, he would now be taking over the family's business affairs. He asked me to draw up the paperwork to transfer operational control to him. And what did you tell him? I told him that I could only take instructions from the legal trustee. When I informed him that the trustee was you, he was silent for a very long time. He seemed to have no idea. So, Leo's plan had been to seize the company along with the house, assuming I was too grief-stricken and uninformed to question him. The coldness of it was breathtaking. Sarah, I said, my voice firming, if I wanted to continue the business exactly as it is, with Mark running the operations, is that possible? Absolutely, she said, a look of relief crossing her face. To be honest, Mark has been very concerned. He's a good man, and he's worried about his future and the future of the crew. I think he would be immensely grateful to know the business is in stable hands. I gathered the papers, my mind a whirlwind of numbers and betrayals and a fierce, protective love that reached beyond the grave. I'd like to meet with Mark as soon as possible. And I need you to prepare a complete summary of all my options regarding Leo's outstanding debt. Of course. Shall I call Mark this afternoon? Please. And Sarah? For now, this all remains between us. Client confidentiality is paramount, Clara. You have my word. As I drove home, my phone buzzed. A text from Fiona. Myrtle, the stager is coming tomorrow to give us a quote. Please make sure you've cleared out some of the clutter, especially in the living room. We want to present a blank slate to buyers. I read the message, then put my phone away. Let them plan their staging. Let them dream of their new life in my house, built on a foundation of lies. They had no idea the ground was hollow beneath them, and that I was now the one holding the blueprints. That evening, I sat in Arthur's study for the first time since he died, the scent of old books and leather enveloping me like a hug. I finally understood his meticulous files, his insistence on contracts and documentation. He hadn't just been building houses. He had been building me a lifeboat. And tomorrow, I would learn just how seaworthy it was. Mark Riley sat at my kitchen table the next morning, his large, calloused hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. At 60, his face was a roadmap of years spent in the sun and wind, but his eyes, usually full of a wry humor, were clouded with worry. Mrs. Sterling, I'll be straight with you, he said, his voice a low rumble. I've been worried sick since we lost Arthur. Leo showed up at the worksite last week, talking about assessing assets and optimizing cash flow. Sounded like he was getting ready to sell us all off for parts. I poured myself a cup, the familiar ritual a small anchor in a churning sea. Mark, what exactly did he say to you? Said that with his dad gone, some tough decisions had to be made. Wanted a full inventory of all our equipment, a list of active contracts, and our payment schedules. Mark's jaw tightened. Even asked for the keys to the main office and the equipment yard. And what did you tell him? I told him I'd need to see some official paperwork first. Arthur was a stickler for procedure. He always told me if anything ever happened to him, I was to wait for instruction from the legal owner. Mark met my gaze. He never said that would be Leo. A profound sense of relief washed through me. Arthur had trusted Mark not just as a foreman, but as a guardian. Mark, I'm going to share something with you, and I need it to remain in confidence for now. His expression grew serious. You have my word, Clara. I laid out the trust documents on the table between us. I own Sterling and Son Artisans, Mark. Not Leo. Arthur put everything into a trust for me 6 years ago. Mark's eyes widened as he scanned the top page. Well, he breathed. Pardon my French, ma'am, but Arthur was always playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. He was, I agreed. And according to these financial statements, the business has done exceptionally well under your management. A flush of pride warmed his weathered features. We do good work, Clara. Arthur taught me that your reputation is the only tool that can't be replaced. Our clients trust us. I want you to continue, Mark. Exactly as you have been, I said. But I need to ask you about Leo. Have you had other dealings with him concerning the business? His expression soured. A few times over the years. He'd swing by when Arthur wasn't around, asking about which clients paid in cash, wanting to know when the big checks were coming in. Once or twice, he even suggested the business could invest in one of his projects. And you told him? To talk to his father. I'm no fool, Mrs. Sterling. I saw the game he was playing. Mark's voice grew hard. Last year, he showed up at the bank on the very day I was depositing the final payment for the library restoration project. A big one. Said it was a coincidence, but he seemed mighty interested in how much the check was for. My stomach tightened. Leo had been circling, tracking the flow of money, timing his requests for loans to coincide with the company's healthiest moments. Just as I was about to ask another question, a car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I saw Leo's silver SUV. "That's my son," I said quietly. "I'd rather he not know what we've been discussing." Mark nodded, quickly gathering the documents. "Whatever you decide to do, Clara, I'm with you. Arthur trusted you with his life's work. That's more than good enough for me." Leo walked in without knocking, a habit that always grated. "Morning, Mom. Didn't know you had company." Mark stopped by to offer his condolences again, I said smoothly. So thoughtful of him. Right. Leo's attention was already elsewhere, his eyes sweeping the kitchen as if mentally placing new appliances. "Actually, Mark, good that you're here. We need to have a chat about the business." Mark's face became a perfect mask of polite neutrality. "Oh, yeah. With Dad gone, things are going to have to change. The family needs to make some practical decisions about the assets." I listened, fascinated by my son's supreme confidence. He was laying claim to a kingdom that had never been his. "What kind of decisions?" Mark asked. "Well, for starters, we need to determine if it's viable to continue operations, or if it makes more sense to liquidate and settle the estate." Leo's tone was breezy, as if discussing the weather. "I see," Mark said. "And who exactly is making these decisions?" Leo blinked, taken aback. "The family is. I'll be handling my father's business affairs from here on out." "You will you?" Mark's tone was mild, but I caught the subtle emphasis. "Mom, maybe you could get us some more coffee," Leo said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Mark and I have some technical stuff to go over." But I didn't move. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I held my ground. "I think I'll stay, thank you. This is my kitchen, and Mark is my guest." Leo looked surprised but shrugged. "Fine. Look, Mark, I need a complete asset inventory by Friday. All equipment, vehicles, materials, and active contracts. And I'll need the login information for the business bank accounts so I can get a handle on the financials." "I'd be happy to facilitate that," Mark said carefully. "Who should I expect to provide the legal authorization for account access?" "Me, obviously." "And you have that legal authorization?" Mark pressed gently. Leo's confidence finally began to fray at the edges. "I'm Arthur Sterling's son and heir. What more authorization do I need?" "Well," Mark said, his voice patient, "your father always insisted on a formal letter from the legal owner before any changes were made. A signed document." Leo turned to me, his frustration evident, expecting me to smooth things over as I always had. "Mom, would you please explain to Mark that I'm in charge of Dad's affairs now?" I looked at my son, this man who was planning to sell my home, who had drained his father's business of nearly $150,000 while claiming poverty, and I made a choice. "Actually, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "I think Mark is being very sensible. Your father was always a great believer in proper documentation." Leo stared at me as if I'd just started speaking in tongues. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about ensuring everything is handled correctly and legally," I replied. "Surely you, as the one handling the affairs, can appreciate the importance of that." For the first time, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed my son's face. And in that flicker, I felt a tremor of something I hadn't felt in years. I felt the solid ground of my own authority beneath my feet. The call came 3 days later, early in the morning. I was in the garden, tending to Arthur's prized roses, when the phone buzzed in my apron pocket. "Mom, we need to talk." "Now." Leo's voice was strained, tight with an anger he was struggling to contain. "Fiona and I are on our way over." "It's barely 7:30, Leo. This can't wait." The line went dead. I took my time. I finished my pruning, washed my hands, and changed into a simple but elegant linen dress Arthur had always liked. If this was to be the final confrontation, I would face it as myself, not as the grieving, compliant woman they expected. They arrived in a cloud of agitated energy, Fiona's heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the flagstone path. I opened the door before they could ring the bell, a small assertion of control. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. Fiona brushed past me, her expensive handbag clutched like a shield. Leo followed, his face a thundercloud. They stood in the middle of the living room, a united front of indignation. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, Mom," Leo began, "but I just got off the phone with Sarah Davis. She's refusing to give me any information about the business without written authorization from the trustee." "What did you say to her?" I sat in Arthur's favorite wingback chair, the one that gave me a clear view of the room. "I told her to follow the law. Your father would have insisted on it." "The law?" Fiona's voice was shrill. "Leo is his only son. He's the heir. What more does anyone need?" "Legal ownership," I said calmly. I reached for the thick file I'd placed on the end table beside me. Both of them tensed. "Your father's will is quite straightforward. It leaves his personal effects and his share of this house to be divided within the family. But Sterling and Son Artisans isn't part of his personal estate. It hasn't been for 6 years." "What are you talking about?" Leo demanded. I opened the file and placed the trust document on the coffee table. "The company has been legally owned by the Sterling Artisans Trust since 2017, and I am the sole trustee and beneficiary." The silence was so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Fiona snatched the document, her perfectly manicured nails trembling as she scanned the dense legal text. Leo read over her shoulder, his face draining of all color. "This is impossible," Fiona whispered. "You don't know the first thing about running a business." "You're right, I don't," I agreed. "Arthur handled all of it. But it seems he understood things about our family dynamic that I was too sentimental to see." Leo sank onto the sofa, his legs seemingly giving out. "But the business was barely breaking even. Dad always said it was a struggle." "The business has been consistently profitable," I corrected gently, handing him the financial statements. "Here are the summaries for the past 6 years." Watching Leo's face as he absorbed the numbers was like watching a man realize the world was not, in fact, flat. "This money," his voice was a choked whisper. "Where did it all go?" "A great deal of it went to you, Leo." I produced the file of loan agreements. $148,600, to be precise. Fiona grabbed the papers from him. "These say loan." "Wade, you told me your father was giving us that money. You said it was our inheritance, just a little early." "They were gifts," Leo insisted, but his voice was hollow. "Dad never once asked for a payment." "No, he didn't," I said. "He was your father. But he was also a meticulous businessman. Sarah Davis has a record of every single transaction, every promissory note you signed." The full scope of their miscalculation was finally dawning on them. Their lifestyle, their plans, their sense of entitlement, all of it had been built on a foundation of debt they thought was a gift. "But this doesn't change the house," Fiona said suddenly, a desperate edge to her voice. "The house is still in the will. It's worth a fortune." "It's ours." "Is it?" I asked mildly. Fiona's eyes flashed. "Don't play games with us, Clara. This house is worth at least $800,000. You're right, it's a beautiful home." "Of course," I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "There is the matter of the mortgage." Leo looked up, his face a mask of confusion. "What mortgage?" "Dad paid this house off decades ago." "He did. But 2 years ago, your father took out a substantial home equity line of credit against the property." I pulled out the last set of documents, the ones I'd found in a file marked simply contingency. "A loan for $600,000. Fiona's face went chalk white. "That's not possible." "We would have known." "The house was solely in his name at that point," I said. "He didn't require anyone else's signature." "And the proceeds from that loan?" "He transferred them directly into the Sterling Artisans Trust." Leo stared at the loan agreement as if it were an artifact from another planet. "But why? Why would he mortgage the house just to put the money in the business?" For the first time, I let the full weight of my hurt and anger show in my voice. "Because he was protecting me, Leo. He was protecting me from this. From being told to pack my bags and leave my own home. From being treated like a piece of old furniture to be disposed of. He was making sure that if you tried to take the house, you would be taking on a massive debt, while the actual value of it was safe with me." Fiona's composure finally shattered. "You manipulated him. You must have. You twisted a dying man's mind. Your father set up this trust 6 years ago, Fiona. He was in perfect health. He wasn't dying, he was planning. And the fact that he felt he needed to plan for this should tell you everything you need to know. Leo's hands shook as he set down the papers. Mom, we can work this out. You don't want to run a business. And the house, it should stay in the family. It is staying in the family, Leo, I said. It's staying with me. But the mortgage payments. Fiona cried. You can't possibly afford them. I can, I said. With the profits from the company you thought was worthless. The company that you, Leo, owe nearly $150,000. I stood, smoothing the front of my dress. Now, I believe you had some advice for me. About finding a new place to live. I think that's an excellent idea. Not for me, of course. But I'm sure you'll find something suitable once you sell your SUV to make the first payment on your debt. Leo looked at me, truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time in his adult life. Mom, you can't be serious. Your father did everything for me, I said, my voice shaking with the force of my conviction. He loved me enough to make sure I would never be at the mercy of anyone. Not even my own son. Fiona was already moving toward the door, her face a mask of fury. This isn't over. We'll see you in court. You're welcome to try, I said. But you'll find that my husband was a much better builder than you are. The walls he built around me are solid. And my lawyer has copies of everything. Leo paused at the doorway, his shoulders slumped. I don't understand, Mom. Why are you doing this to us? I met his gaze, my heart aching for the son I thought I had, but my resolve unshaken. I'm not doing anything to you, Leo. I'm simply refusing to let you do it to me. When the door closed behind them, the house fell into a profound silence. I stood alone in my living room, in my house, surrounded by the quiet, powerful evidence of my husband's love. And I felt something I hadn't known in 42 years. The exhilarating, terrifying, and beautiful feeling of standing entirely on my own. Arthur had given me one last gift. He had given me back to myself. 6 months later, I stood on the cedar deck of a small cottage, a mug of tea warming my hands. The salty air of the Oregon coast filled my lungs, a scent of renewal and possibility. The cottage in Port Blossom was modest compared to the family home in Crestwood, but every inch of it was mine. The sea glass colors on the walls, the overstuffed armchair position to catch the morning light, the shelves filled with books I had always meant to read, it was a space that reflected not a shared history, but my own dawning future. Sterling and Son Artisans, now simply Sterling Artisans, was flourishing. Mark sent me a detailed report every Friday, his emails filled with pride in their work. The quarterly profits were more than enough to cover my new, simpler expenses. The large house in Crestwood had been sold, the trust paid off the home equity loan, and the remaining proceeds went into my investment portfolio. I was, for the first time in my life, completely and utterly financially secure on my own terms. The cottage itself had been Arthur's final surprise. Tucked away in the trust's asset files, Sarah Davis had found the deed, purchased 3 years prior. With it was a sealed envelope addressed to me. Inside, a short note in Arthur's familiar scrawl, for my Ellie, when she's ready for an ocean view and a schedule of her own. Even from beyond, he had paved the way. This morning, however, held a final piece of business from my old life. My lawyer, a sharp and compassionate woman named Ms. Albright, was due to arrive with the final settlement papers. Leo and Fiona had, as promised, tried to fight. Their case, built on accusations of undue influence, had crumbled under the mountain of meticulous documentation Arthur had left behind. The court-ordered mediation had been their last resort. The doorbell chimed at 10 o'clock sharp. Clara, Ms. Albright said, her smile warm as she took the seat by the window. I have the final agreement for your signature. How did they take the terms? I asked, pouring her a cup of tea. A flicker of wry amusement crossed her face. Let's just say Mr. Sterling's lawyer argued passionately that family bonds should transcend mere financial contracts. I countered that family bonds usually don't require court-ordered mediation to enforce a 6-figure debt. The agreement was simple. Leo and Fiona would repay the full debt to the trust over 10 years. If they missed a single payment, the trust was legally empowered to garnish Leo's wages and place a lien on any property they owned. It was a firm, unyielding backstop. "There's one other thing," Ms. Albright said, pulling a personal envelope from her briefcase. "Your son asked me to give this to you." The letter was brief, written on plain paper in Leo's untidy script. "Mom, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I am so sorry. It took losing everything to see how much I had. Romy and I are in counseling. I'm working a second job. I understand now what Dad was doing. He wasn't cutting me out. He was trying to teach me to stand on my own feet. I just refused to learn. I hope one day you can forgive me."